Hey everyone, it's CSG, your local gaming weatherman, coming to you live with another climate report. This time we will be covering Lies of P, a game created by NeoWiz, a South Korean video game developer whose presence or reputation to me has basically been nothing. In other words, I've never heard of them or their games until now, and I definitely didn't think this game's premise sounded very interesting. In fact, if you asked me if a Souls-like game based on Pinocchio was coming out a year or two ago by a developer I've never heard of, I would have thought that sounds awfully cringy. However, I am extremely happy to report that this game is quite the opposite and is an absolute masterpiece. And to tell you why you should definitely play this one, we'll be covering the story, gameplay, art style, my personal pros and cons, and wrap it up with a climate meter rating as we do with all of my reports. So anyways, let's dive right in and see why this game is absolute heat. Spoiler warning, there will be spoilers moving forward, so if you don't want to be spoiled, leave now. Alright, here we go. To start us off, let's discuss the story somewhat briefly. The story is about Pinocchio, a puppet made by Geppetto, same as the classic tale you all know too well, to attempt to revive Carlo, Geppetto's real son, that is dead by the beginning of the game. Sophia, essentially the firekeeper in this game, revives you through the use of ergo, which is a trapped human essence that comes from the creation of the puppets. This is basically your soul currency, if you're familiar with Dark Souls games. You play throughout the game taking out bosses that are giant, very awesome looking puppet abominations that are under the influence of the Grand Covenant. Essentially, puppets that are under this influence are in a frenzy and will kill anyone and anything they can. Basically, every boss in this game has a super rad design, lore, and moveset behind them, for the most part. As you progress throughout the game, you'll then be introduced to the Lie System, which takes me into the discussion of the Lie System. This is essentially the game's big RPG gimmick. The feature is that you can make responses to certain characters throughout the story like an RPG, which for the most part will affect what ending you get and what opportunities, bosses, weapons, and items you will be able to acquire as you progress. There are many optional bosses in the game tied to the Lie System, and just by simple exploration as well. In addition, there are many side quests out in the world which also feed into the Lie System sometimes, and they are super easy to find, start, continue, and finish. You just have to keep an eye on characters' head icons with the Stargazer fast travel map. Pay attention to some noises while you're out in the world. Typically you'll hear them near the windows that have persons' shadows on them. And you just listen to their dialogue, and they'll give you items or tell you where to go. And if you read item descriptions in the items tab where all your letters and envelopes go, the game does an excellent job on pointing you in the right direction for side quest progression. These quests may also provide extra depth to you for world building and characters developments, if you're into lore like I am, as well as assist in providing the options given to you for the different endings for the game. But don't quote me on that one, as I'm not too sure if the side quests impact the endings. Which bring us to the different endings. There are 3 different endings: the evil puppet ending, the puppet ending, and the real boy ending, which is, I think, the canonically best ending. However, the endings go as follows. The evil ending is where you give Geppetto your heart at the end and kill everyone in the hotel that has been helping you throughout the entire game. Granted, this all happens in what I think is a very anticlimactic cutscene, which should have been a gameplay experience where you do it yourself. Regardless, this is ending number 1. Ending number 2 is where you make puppet-based decisions throughout the entire game but never give Geppetto your heart. He'll call you a useless puppet, and it basically ends there as he dies. This ending is probably the weakest out of all 3 in my opinion. Then there is the 3rd ending, which is considered the canonically good ending, where you made human decisions throughout the entire game, which is probably the most beneficial for items and opportunities. You give Sophia peace, and she gives you life, kind of. Regardless, through human decisions, the ergo has essentially turned you from a puppet into a real boy. You refuse to give your heart, you kill Geppetto's abomination, and Geppetto dies. As he dies, he says, "I'm sorry, son," realizing you are the son he was wanting to have all this time, a true successor or reincarnation of Carlo. You then revive Sophia into a new puppet form, free the city from the puppet frenzy and petrification disease, which in quick summary is a disease caused from the alchemists and ergo that turn regular humans and puppets alike into abominations. They are the second faction you fight against throughout the entire game and are the main antagonist in the second half of the game. Essentially, everything goes back to normal as it can be now, and you'll live a happily ever after ending, for the most part. Then you are teased about what they might be working on next, NeoWiz's next title, which may potentially be a Wizard of Oz Souls-like game, at least from what we can infer and witness at the end. Which again, doesn't sound like a game I would be interested in, but now NeoWiz has caught my attention as a very skillful and creative developer. I am sure it will be just as good, if not better, if they continue forward with that premise. Moving on, we dive into the gameplay. Let's first take a quick look at the mechanics. This game has a heavy emphasis on parrying or perfect guarding, which becomes almost a necessity by the latter half of the game. It helps give back guard regain if struck while blocking. It will chip your health, but won't take it away until you perfect guard following attacks to regain your health, or strike enemies to regain it as well. The parrying system is extremely similar to God of War Ragnarok and Bloodborne. Same with guard regain from Bloodborne. In fact, overall, this game is extremely in line with Bloodborne, aesthetically to a degree, sure, but also the gameplay's feel. In this game, you are capable of crafting your own weapons through many different handles and blades and weapon arts. However, when you craft weapons that have C motivity and C technique or higher, you basically have the weapon you need for the rest of your playthrough, especially if you use the Sawtooth Blade. That thing is absolutely busted in my opinion. Then there is durability, which honestly isn't a big deal. You just grind it when it gets red back to full durability. It's really only something to keep track of a fair amount of the time, and just being able to use the right opening to get a sharpen during a boss fight, as this new mechanic really is only crucial during long or strong bosses, or even both. But I did notice, however, that it was really only a critical aspect of gameplay for bosses that had two phases, or if you're in a petrification decay heavy zone. But overall, it's just a little extra something to keep track of, and nothing too crazy or detrimental to the overall experience. Reminiscent of Elden Ring, but feeling almost more expanded, is the weapon arts in this game, called Fable Arts. You have defensive Fable Arts and offensive Fable Arts, based on the weapons you use, craft, and mix and match. They're extremely well done here, and provide a little extra fun to how you play and plan your attacks or routes in the sections of the game. Then we get to really cool additions, which feel very reminiscent of God of War Ragnarok in my opinion, and that is the Legion Arms, which provide the player with defensive and offensive, or both capabilities, towards enemies using your left arm. It's almost like Kratos with a shield, or in simpler terms, a dual-wielding weapon mechanic. Plenty of arms to choose from, like the enemy grapple hook known as the puppet string, which was very focused on in the advertisements. And then we have the explosive mine arm, the gun arm, the flamethrower arm, and the electricity emitting arm. Or even the shield arm, which is my personal favorite. The shield arm, to me personally, felt the most useful overall, especially when it was fully upgraded. Which reminds me, you are able to use Legion calibers that you pick up by exploring the map and taking out certain enemies, and apply 3 different upgrades to each arm. Speaking of upgrades, we are introduced to the P-Organ upgrades, which is an upgrade tree. This upgrade tree provides intrinsic perks that are lesser affecting perks that you apply to the Quartz currency-based perks, I know it's a lot, which allow for the even greater intrinsic abilities like an additional dodge roll, better guard regain retention, extra pulse cell charges, which are basically your Estus flasks, or health packs, and better health recovery when using the flasks, and many, many more. There are 5 phases to the P-Organ tree, with 4 to 5 having some of the best perks overall in the game. However, having this system where you have lesser perks that feed into your bigger perks simultaneously, and when fully upgrading the tree, this will allow you to feel much more powerful as you progress, and gives you a real sense of progression as a player overall. You feel like you're getting stronger as the game keeps going. Lastly, there are then standard character traits upgrades, like with other Souls games. These are pretty standard, like using Ergo for certain attributes, such as Vigor, Endurance, Capacity, and the traits that scale with certain weapons, or the Legion Arm, such as Motivity, Technique, and Advanced attributes. Oh yeah, also, the game has weapon bench upgrades, which is just your weapon that you turn from a +1 to a +10 or a +1 to a +5 if you're using a boss's specialty weapon. That is earned after defeating a boss, of course. That's about it though with my breakdown and summarization of the gameplay elements. They're all pretty much fantastic. So let's move on to the art style. My good lord, this is truly a beautiful game. The aesthetic is like a steampunk, Iron Giant, Bloodborne, the list goes on, but it's a fantasy at heart. But it all feels based in France, and it nails it perfectly. This is the most creatively fresh-looking aesthetic in these kind of games since Bloodborne. No hate for Elden Ring, that game is just as gorgeous graphically. It just essentially feels like Dark Souls 4 though, which isn't bad. It just doesn't look nearly as original as this game's aesthetic. Regardless, the boss designs, environment designs, and flashiness of using weapons and weapon arts are too damn perfect, and simply gorgeous eye candy. Now let's talk about how forgiving this game is, because it's something I noticed right away when I was playing it. First off, it's very forgiving with heals, as you can charge heals when heals are depleted, which I find very helpful for newcomers to Souls-like games, but also just an added helpful feature for veterans alike as well. Parry or perfect guard timing window is very generous for the most part, but honestly, at times it can be frustratingly fast or just inconsistent with the sheer haste enemies could have. Which isn't a bad thing per se, it just changes the flow of gameplay and can be very frustrating at times. I'll dive more into this with a few experiences I had with the game in just a bit. The last thing I find forgiving, if you use it properly, is guard retains when blocking attacks and either getting a following set of attacks or perfect guards to bring health back through those retains, so that you can keep as much health as possible. I just found it extremely easy to stay at full health for a majority of the time. Anyways, this takes us into my pros and cons sections. For the pros, basically everything I previously discussed are my pros with this game, minus maybe one, but we'll discuss that in a second. It executes damn near everything perfectly, from the story, RPG-like lie system, different potential endings, blocking system, weapon durability system, crafting system, the Legion arm system, the upgrade system in its entirety, and how user-friendly this game is for people who may have never played a Souls game. It's definitely one of the easier Souls-like games, but that's not a bad thing in the slightest. Speaking of which, this brings us to my cons with the games. A few issues I have with the game, which are not very big complaints, come down to three things. 1. Enemies can be pretty spongy throughout the game's entirety, when I feel some of them shouldn't be, or at least they should be toned down a little bit. Like the big baby puppet, the circus puppet that jump scares you in the wine cellar, and the mad clown puppet that winds up his boulder fist and punches you with it. I understand these are bigger enemies, they're considered majors or whatever, but I felt their health could be reduced a bit more because of how hard they hit when the game introduces you to them. I'm all for difficulty, but it could have been a bit more balanced in terms of timing of introduction for these enemies. Number 2 is that some of the bosses and enemies have ridiculously short parry time or perfect guard time windows. And yes, it definitely could be a skill issue on my part, but I felt that even when I was doing my absolute best and playing great, especially when I was learning these moves, I still couldn't parry some of these moves. For example, Luxasia's second phase lightning dive. It is so absurdly quick. I felt there should have been at least half a second more of parry time forgiveness for quick attacks similar to these. Same goes with King of Puppets, second phase, where Romeo goes incredibly Insano style on your ass, and it's incredibly difficult to get an opening or a successful parry, due to the Telegraph having an absurd wind-up time, which pranks you into thinking, oh, he's about to strike, then he doesn't, and then he comes down on you in only a few iframes. This is based on only my experience though, so maybe you experience differently. And lastly, number 3, is just that the lies system isn't as restrictive as I think it should be. I think there should have been more repercussions for making decisions, as you can still achieve the best ending even after making a bunch of choices that in reality should be counted against it. Same with acquiring the white hair, golden lie weapon that feeds into that ending. This one is a 50-50 complaint, as I find it great in a first-time playthrough for new players in general, as it allows for any mistakes. But at the same time, it would encourage more playthroughs with proper decision-making to get to the ending you want if it was more restrictive. Regardless, these are all my personal complaints at the end of the day and will not affect my rating of the game overall. I just felt I should mention them. Maybe you'll feel differently though. Let me know down below. Alright y'all, I think it's time to give this game a proper rating on my handy dandy climate report meter. I would have to give this game a scorching rating. This game is truly a masterpiece, and though there are a few issues I have with it, personally, they don't even nearly amount to me being able to deduct any personal points for my rating. This game truly feels like a FromSoft Dark Souls game, and then some, in the best possible way. Because of that, this game gets my highest rating. If I didn't know already going into this game that it wasn't made by FromSoft, I would have never thought any different. NeoWiz seriously cooked something crazy hot here, and I recommend you all to buy this game as soon as you can. Anyways, I think I've praised this game enough for one video. I hope you guys really like my review of Lies of P. Did you think my review was fair? Did I miss anything? What did you guys think of the game? If you haven't already played it, have I convinced you to go out and purchase the game, supporting the devs for a sequel and experience a true masterpiece? Let me know down in the comments below. I always read them. Also, I wanted to briefly mention, due to my busy life schedule, I have come up with a way to deliver my thoughts and opinions on games even faster through the use of weather whiplashes. These are going to be basically a more condensed climate report focusing on smaller games or games I don't need to go super in depth with, like I do with my climate reports, with the goal being 5 minutes or less. I have a playlist on the channel that is public right now, but we'll add videos later as time progresses. The first one will be a Mario video, so stay tuned these next couple of weeks. Anyways, y'all, that wraps this up. I hope y'all enjoyed. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Go buy Lies of P. It is absolutely fantastic. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Peace out.